The girl's voice cracked through the marble lobby. "Please, someone help me. He's my brother." Every head turned, but only one man in a dark suit stopped walking. Daniel Stone, billionaire, froze as her hands clutched his sleeve. Her eyes burned with desperation, raw and unrelenting. And in that moment, the entire weight of her world shifted onto his shoulders. Before we go any further, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if the story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now let's begin. The rain had the soft, careful rhythm of someone tapping a window to be let in. It slid down the glass of Daniel Whitmore's penthouse like slow ink, darkening the city lights below until they became scattered, trembling stars. From this height, the world was a blur of neon and wet asphalt, a map drawn in reflections. Inside, everything was arranged with the same exactness his name promised: polished surfaces, muted colors, a silence curated to the degree of discomfort. Daniel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows with his hands in his pockets, watching the rain repaint the skyline. He wore a charcoal suit that had seen 100 boardrooms and 1,000 handshakes. The suit fit him like an apology he had learned to make without meaning it. His face was not unkind, but it had learned to be private. The lines at his eyes were less from laughter and more from the weight of being watched. He had the look of a man who measured time in meetings and margins, a man whose life had been constructed from contracts and balance sheets and the steady, relentless logic of power. There was a hum in the apartment, the kind of background noise that insisted on being noticed only if you were listening. A refrigerator fridge, a distant traffic swell, the faint memory of a piano recording someone played once and never again. Daniel let himself listen to that hum. It was easier than listening to him. On the marble counter lay a small envelope, white and unmarked. He had not opened it. He had not let anything private into the space in a long time unless he had chosen it. The envelope had been placed there that morning by a courier whose gloves smelled faintly of lavender. There had been no return address, only a single line of handwriting that read, "For Daniel Whitmore, you decide." He had read it twice, then set it down and gone about his day, as if the paper were an accessory rather than a summons. He was thinking about that envelope now, but not with curiosity. He was thinking about the choices he had made to get here, the deals, the silences, the marriages of convenience that turned into neat footnotes in his life. He thought about his father's voice once telling him, "You must always be the sharp edge." Daniel had tried to be sharp for so long that the blade had begun to dull him instead. A soft chime from the living room broke the rhythm. The smart speaker he used only for calculation and stock alerts flickered to life. "Breaking," it said in a voice Daniel had chosen because it sounded neutral. "A viral clip is trending. Young woman pleading for help in a live stream." The machine did not add drama. It offered facts the way a ledger offered numbers. Daniel turned away from the window. The city was still a watercolor beyond the glass. On the screen, a handheld phone recorded a cramped room lit with a single bulb. A girl's face filled the frame. Dark skin, raw with tiredness, eyes that had learned to hold too much. Her name was shown in the caption as Naomi Carter. She looked no older than 22. Her hair was braided back, and her voice hitched on words that wanted to be steady but couldn't be. "Please," she said into the cheap microphone, "please save my brother. They took him last night. I don't know where they took him. I don't know who to call. If anyone can, please, I'm begging." The video was small, grainy, and immediate. Viewers had already flooded the comments with hearts and questions and cruel jokes. Someone had written, "Famous people donate, right?" And another had typed, "This is real. Share." The numbers climbed like a thermometer. Daniel watched the numbers climb, because that was the way he measured the world, by momentum, by reach. The small room in the video smelled, in his mind's imagination, of boiled rice and old cloth and the dark, iron scent of worry. Naomi's voice had the roughness of someone who had been made to wait too long without answers. She kept looking off-screen as if listening for a sound she could not name. Her lips trembled, and she swallowed more than once. He could have turned the video off. The rational part of him, the part that always separated image from obligation, suggested he do exactly that. It was easy for him to categorize suffering into causes he could fund, projects he could use for positive PR, programs that fit into neat grants. But this girl's plea was not a grant application. It had no form, no committee, no predictable timeline. It had a single syllable of urgency. Please. Daniel's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with oxygen. The hum of the apartment seemed suddenly like a held breath. For a moment, he felt like a stranger in a house that had been built for him, but not by him. He had keys, but not the map to their use. He thought of the white envelope again, of the anonymous handwriting that had the nerve to place a choice in front of him as if he were not already full of them. Outside, a delivery truck hissed through water. Above, thunder moved like a slow, understanding hand. He remembered a different thunder, years earlier when he had stood under his father's study lamps and watched men trade futures like cards. He had been younger then, and at the center of his hunger had been a promise to never be vulnerable, to always be the one who decided. That promise had hardened into habit. But habit was not the same thing as peace. The broadcasting window on his screen continued. Naomi's voice was softer now, the kind of quiet that comes when tears are held back by sheer will. I don't have money, she said. I don't have connections. I have my brother. His name is Ethan. He's only 12. He's got asthma. They said they'd come back if I didn't pay. I can't pay. I don't know what to do. Ethan, the name landed like a stone dropped into the glass of his composure. The room in his mind shifted. For a second, he was in his own childhood kitchen, the colors muted by distance, the smell of soup simmering while he listened to his mother counting change. He had once been 11 and had thought the world was too big for him and at the same time so small that a single adult's absence could change everything. This was not about PR. It was not about algorithms. It was a voice pressed through static and pixels that reached him as if through a secret line. He wondered, absurdly, how many other people like Naomi were whispering into the void and getting no answer, because the world measured replies in influence and not in urgency. He had built companies that could map people like Naomi. His networks could triangulate locations, trace IP addresses, make cold calls until a door was found. He could, with a word, arrange transport, legal counsel, temporary shelter, the mechanisms of relief that in his experience cost time but not imagination. He picked up the envelope and felt the paper's thinness between his fingers. The courier's lavender lingered still, faint and ridiculous. The line of handwriting became suddenly heavy with meaning. For Daniel, the choice sat before him like an account waiting to be reconciled. He could call his security team, open an investigative fund, create a headline. He could do what he always did, convert a human problem into a structured solution and remove himself from the mess. Or he could follow a path that had no format. The narrator, not wholly Daniel, not wholly another voice, noticed the split in him, the way wealth had taught him to see problems in columns. There was a part of him that loved precision because precision kept him from feeling. And there was a smaller, more dangerous part that had been awake in the night lately, noticing the gaps and wondering if money was a bridge or just another wall. Naomi leaned into the camera and, with the rawness of someone who had nothing left to lose, whispered, "If you see this, please, help me. My brother, Ethan. Please save him." Daniel read the words as if they were a ledger entry with only 3 columns: name, need, time. But their weight was not a line on a balance sheet. It was the sudden crack in a glass he had not known was whole. Rain continued to draw streaks on the window. Somewhere below, in the blurred city, lives moved in and out of frames like tides. Daniel felt the first true pull he had felt in a long time. Not the pull of profit, nor the pull of reputation, but the pull of something more dangerous. Responsibility that arrived without a board meeting to approve it. He set the envelope down, but did not close his hands around the habit of choice. For the first time this week, perhaps for the first time in years, He walked away from the window and toward a decision that would not be audited. The rain kept falling, whispering against the glass, as if it knew the story was only beginning. The next morning, the city woke with a thin, gray light that made every surface look like it had been washed and left to wait. Daniel woke, too, not from sleep so much as from the soft exhaustion that slept beside him. A long list of decisions deferred, each one pried open and examined in the dark. He moved through his morning with the careful speed of a man who had learned to conserve energy for the parts of his life that required performance. Coffee was measured, toast browned to a precise shade. The newspaper app scrolled in the corner of his kitchen like a clock counting down headlines. But the world had already begun to insist again. His phone buzzed at 8, not with a chosen alert, but with a direct number. He did not answer at first. The habit of letting calls land in voicemail felt like a small gate he kept closed. Then a second buzz came, and a third. The screen showed Naomi Carter's name because some anonymous helper had posted a direct contact on the thread, and the thread had found its way into hands willing to act. He let it ring once before picking up. Whitmore, he said, and the syllable was accustomed to opening doors. Mr. Whitmore? Naomi's voice was thinner without the camera. It was the voice of someone holding the edge of a cliff and refusing to look down. There were sounds in the background. A muffled sob, a metal chair scraped along a tile floor, the telltale clack of someone speaking with the kind of forced calm that comes with calls made on bad batteries and thinner hope. You called, Daniel said. He tried to keep his voice simple, the way a broker keeps tone leveled on the phone. You're my brother, she said quickly, words spilling like water. They took him last night. They came in a van. I thought if I posted, someone might see. Someone like you. The name dropped like a stone in the line, Ethan. They said if I didn't pay before sunset, they'd. Her breath hitched and something large and terrible filled the space between them. They said they'd make sure he couldn't breathe. He has asthma, Mr. Whitmore. He needs inhalers. He needs an inhaler every day. I understand, Daniel said, though he did not. Understanding was not an algorithm he could plug into this. He felt the familiar friction of wanting to simplify, to ask how much, to move funds, to buy time with numbers, but Naomi's voice kept rushing ahead of him, urgency braided with fear. Where are you now? In a shelter, she said. Temporary. My phone is with the shelter. I can't leave. They'll watch me. The words suggested something worse. The possibility that the people who took Ethan might be watching her too, waiting to see if she made offers or calls. I saw your name on the thread. People said you helped once. I don't have time. Please help me find him. That last plea was not a data point. It was a small, naked demand that bypassed his formulas. He could hear the city beyond her, a distant siren and the flat roar of traffic. He read the room with the skills he had. Triangulate, verify, mobilize. He imagined how quickly his private team could move if he told them to. A legal team could ask questions. Private security could trace a van's route. A social worker could verify the shelter. He found himself already drafting memos inside his head, naming tasks even as Naomi's words dragged him out of the neat columns he preferred. At the same time, a second voice sat behind his thoughts like a shadow. The envelope on his kitchen counter, the anonymous line you decide, breathed into him. The courier's lavender smell returned like a ghost. He thought of choices again, of being at the center of power and pretending to be outside of life's small, sharp emergencies. It was easy to give money. It was harder to look at the people who needed it and not make them instruments of his goodwill. I'll help, he said, saying it felt sudden and oddly final. Give me your location and anything you remember about the van. I'll have someone pick you up. Don't tell anyone else about the call. What if they're listening? Naomi whispered. The fear in her voice was not only for her brother now, it had widened into the fear of being marked for hope. They said to me, they said if I told, they'd hurt him. They left a note taped to the door. It said she swallowed. It said they know where we live. They know our names. Daniel heard what she did not say. Ransom. Threat. The thin, invisible line that hooked the private and the desperate together. He felt anger there, small and electric, and a cold, strategic calm that had always been his default. He gave the location, an intersection name she read off between breaths, and he asked for the shelter's contact. Naomi hesitated, then transmitted a number. He called it, and a tired woman answered, verifying her presence. Daniel, who had built systems that ran on certainty, found in that verification a small rip of relief. He arranged the pickup. He told Naomi he would dispatch a car and a woman from his team who worked under the cover of a charity he supported. He asked questions he had learned to ask, names of neighbors, the make of the van, details of thigh tattoos, or the way the driver smelled. He listened to information that could be filed and used. Yet beneath the litany of details there was no comfort, only a deepening sense that this problem did not belong to his usual categories. After he hung up, his phone lit with a flurry of messages. His assistants pinged for instructions. His security chief asked for permission to mobilize. A journalist he had once helped tried to get an exclusive. A stranger sent him a private message. Why you? Why now? His inbox was a map of possible angles, each one a potential headline, each one a funnel for his compassion. He breathed, and the apartment seemed suddenly too small. The envelope on the counter waited for him as if it expected an answer. For a man who had spent his life avoiding surprises, the sense of being chosen by chance felt oddly exposing. He ordered the team out, but also texted his lawyer, the quiet man who handled the messes with the same hands that wrote checks. He authorized things on instinct, a trace on the van's license, a request to check local hospitals, a quiet call to a contact in the police department who owed him a favor. Yet the narrator, part outside watcher, part the feeling inside Daniel, noticed a fissure. His readiness to act was not pure. Somewhere in him stirred an odd mix of curiosity and a private hunger to be needed. Power was usually measured in markets and contracts. Here, it was being measured by the speed of a heartbeat on another side of the city, by whether a boy named Ethan would live through the next night. The danger was not only in the kidnapper's plans, but in what this moment might do to the man who had always kept his hands clean. There was also a shadow at the edge of the scene that the narrator could not ignore, a comment from the thread that had been highlighted by a user named Grace Whitmore, same surname, different profile, joking about internet heroism. The comment had been swiftly deleted, but not before someone took a screenshot. The coincidence of the name made the narrator's impartial voice tilt. Was it a relative? An ally? A plant? The hint of that screenshot settled like dust on his thoughts. Daniel signed off messages and watched his team move like chess pieces. The car was dispatched. Naomi's shelter confirmed she was being picked up. For every action he could film in a report, there were inner movements he could not proof. A tautness at the base of his throat, the strange thrill of a life interrupted. He had not expected to feel the way he felt, as if the small, human plea had scraped a part of him that thought it had been dulled. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and loud. Children walked to school, shopkeepers flipped open metal doors, a dog barked at a man carrying a bouquet. But somewhere under that bustle, a boy named Ethan waited for an inhaler he might never receive if the day was unkind. Daniel watched the map of his world and then, with an unscience-like impulse, deleted the spreadsheet he had begun composing in his head. He would not turn this into a product. He would not let it become an offering where he was the hero on a polished stage. He stepped out of his apartment and into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft pneumatic sigh. The city loomed beyond glass and rain. The inciting thread of Naomi's plea had been pulled taut. Somewhere along its length a knot would form, or a cut would be made. Daniel did not yet know which. He only felt with startling clarity that he had moved from observer to participant, and that once crossed, the line back would be complicated by more than money. The car hummed through the wet streets like a private thought. Daniel sat in the back, hands folded, watching buildings slide by in slow gray. Beside him, a woman from his outreach network, Claire Adams, scrolled her tablet with the quiet focus of someone who had been trained to make hope efficient. Claire had soft eyes and a way of listening that made people tell the truth. She had been his inside person on projects that needed a human face. Tonight, she was his face in the field. She's small for her voice, Claire said quietly, as if reading the room aloud. Loud because she must be. Brave because she has to be. Bravery is often the last luxury, Daniel answered. He did not mean it as a judgment. He only felt the worn place inside him where words like that fit. Does this shelter trust our people? They're strained, Claire said. Funding cuts. People burn out. But Sarah there, she'll hold her line. She believes in kids. Good, Daniel said. He felt both more and less sure than the sentence made him sound. Inside, he kept a ledger of likely outcomes. Find Ethan, negotiate his release, create safe housing. The ledger was a place of comfort. It was also a place his heart kept trying to sneak out of. At the shelter, Naomi's face looked smaller in person than on screen. The camera had enlarged her fear into a public spectacle. Up close, her fear was private, hollowed out by exhaustion. She looked at Daniel like someone seeing a light through a hole in a door. Her hands were folded around a paper cup, fingers that played at the edge as if that stitch could hold her together. Mr. Whitmore, she said, the voice of a thin rope that wobbled. She repeated his name the way a prayer is repeated, a call sent into belief. You came. I came because you asked, Daniel said. He meant both sentences. He had always liked being practical, yet the practical here felt oddly intimate. Claire stepped forward, gentle and efficient, with Sarah from the shelter taking in Naomi like she was taking stock of a fragile parcel. We'll find him, Sarah promised. We'll do what we can right away. The police have been notified. Naomi's laugh was a quick, jagged sound. I called. They came, but they said it might be a civil matter. They asked for proof of ransom. They asked for money transfer screenshots. My phone died when they took Ethan. Her shoulders rose then fell, as if carrying the small body of a child could be done by breath alone. Daniel listened and catalogued, but the narrator, the part that watched without Daniel's neat accounting, saw the thin seams in him. A man who knew how to buy services but had not been taught how to be present in sorrow. He felt clumsy with Naomi's pain because presence asked for time and risk and undress of his usual control. Later in his car, Naomi sat with Claire and told a story that was not new to anyone who had known hunger. An absentee father, a mother working double shifts, small kindnesses that stitched them through school and winter. Ethan's asthma, she said, started when he was 5. We kept him on inhalers. The clinic gave him one spray and said if things got worse, go to the hospital. I couldn't always get him there on time. When did this start? Daniel asked, voice measured. Last night, she said. They came after midnight. 2 men, a van. They took my brother from the building entrance. They tape a note that said pay or regret. They used the kind of voice that sounded like they were used to being believed. Regret, Daniel repeated, tasting the word. The narrator noticed how he used words like pills to dull or to heal to manage the world. He felt again the thin crack that had opened in him when Naomi had said Ethan. The name stuck to him in a way names rarely did. It was not because the boy was special, it was because the boy was small and frightened and had a single medical need that could be fatal without help. The simplicity of the need made complexity cruel. Back at his office, Marcus Hale, his lawyer, sat across from him with a look Daniel had learned meant caution. Marcus was an older man with creased hands, the kind of person who understood how to make untidy truths legally tidy. We need to be careful, Marcus said. Public involvement can complicate police work, and your name attached to a private recovery raises questions. How did you find her? There are optics. Optics are not my concern if a child's life is at risk, Daniel said. He heard the edge in his voice and wondered who it belonged to. Marcus nodded slowly, the lawyer weighing precedent and exposure. But there's also the screenshot, Marcus said finally. A user named Grace Whitmore posted something. It was deleted, but someone grabbed it. That association can be spun. Family involvement, insider manipulations. We need to be precise. Daniel had known of Grace Whitmore, the public activist who had built a following criticizing the wealthy and demanding transparency. She had been sharp with him once, and he with her. The shared surname had been a small, embarrassing coincidence that the public enjoyed speculating about. He had never liked surprise trivia about his life. It made him feel less composed. "Keep it quiet," Daniel said, the sentence both instruction and admission. He did not tell Marcus the way his chest had tightened at the thought of Grace's name or the flicker of memory. A childhood photograph of two children at the edge of a park, him with a ribbon of pride and a hand that felt foreign. The narrator watched the private memory and noted how old ghosts still left marks. Lucas Reed, his security chief, was brusque and efficient in his manner. He filled the room with a confidence that suggested he had been in danger 1,000 times and always came out with his plans intact. Yet there was a hollow in Lucas, too, a need to be needed that sometimes looked like loyalty and sometimes like ownership. "We'll trace the van," Lucas said. "We'll go through CCTV, transactions, hospital admissions. We'll find them. And if they make a demand," Marcus asked. "We negotiate," Lucas said. "We do not pay more than necessary. We keep it clean." The narrating voice noticed Lucas's emphasis on control. His answers lay on a spectrum like all the rest: clean versus messy, expedient versus whole. The implication of "keep it clean" suggested someone who feared messes more than harm. Naomi slept fitfully at the shelter that night. Daniel left instructions to check on her and went home in the rain with a head full of small lists. He found Grace Whitmore online that night, not by design but by the soft, invasive way the internet presents old acquaintances. Her posts had the fire of conviction. Her comments beneath them were merciless. In one comment thread someone had written, "Who is Grace to judge? Her brother must be rich." Another replied, "She does what she can." The narrator caught Daniel's pulse stuttering at the idea that someone with that surname had mocked the very mercy he was now trying to extend. The possibility of betrayal, that someone near him might twist this crisis into spectacle, glinted like a hazard. In the small hours, Daniel sat alone and tried to name what scared him. Was it losing control? Being visible? Or was it the possibility that helping would change him in ways his balance sheets could not track? He thought of Ethan, of the inhaler bottle with its tiny label and the weight of such a small thing in a big man's life. He thought of Naomi's eyes and how pleading had sounded less like a public broadcast and more like a map that expected him to follow. The characters moved like planets in a slow orbit. Daniel with compartmentalized power, Naomi with raw need, Claire with steady compassion, Lucas with protective calculation, Marcus with wary counsel, and Grace like a rumor at the edges. Each of them carried private motives and soft wounds. Each of them, in their small and big ways, would be forced to reveal what they hid. The narrator watched, impartial and intimate, knowing that the next movement would not only test their skills but their hearts. The trace came back in a single, small line on Lucas's screen, an IP address that did not belong to Naomi's shelter or the phone carrier. It belonged to a coffee shop 2 blocks from Daniel's penthouse, a thin island of light in a street that smelled of rain and diesel. Lucas scrubbed the footage faster than Daniel could follow. The video jumped, a woman's hand, quick fingers, the tilt of a head. The camera caught the curve of a bracelet, a faint scar on a thumb. Then the feed collapsed into pixels and a timestamp. Daniel's chest went tight. He had expected a trail of tire marks and shadowy vans, not a digital fingerprint that led toward someone he trusted. "Run a face match," Marcus ordered. His voice was careful, the voice of a man who knew how to hold suspicion without spilling it. Lucas worked the systems with a machine-like calm, his fingers moving over keys. Claire sat very still in the corner of the operations room, her tablet idle in her lap. For the first time since she had joined him in the field, she looked like a person waiting to be read. Lucas's screen paused on the coffee shop footage. A face filled the frame for a moment, not Naomi's, not the girl he had seen in the shelter. It was Claire, soft eyes, careful smile, the small mole at the corner of her left eye. She looked up from a drink, glanced around, then reached into her bag and pulled out a phone. On another angle, the camera caught Naomi in the passenger seat of an old sedan, hair pulled back, looking into the camera as if rehearsing a line. For God's sake, Daniel said. The words were a kind of prayer, release, and a plea. He had not expected to see Claire there. Her presence at the shelter, her quiet confidence, he had taken them as signs of alignment. Now, the footage looked like proof of something else, orchestration. Claire's hand went to her mouth. She did not attempt to smooth an explanation. Instead, she sat and let the room measure her. Daniel's first, raw reaction was a sharp, hot betrayal. He had trusted Claire with names, with programs, with the soft parts of his world he rarely let anyone touch. If she had staged Naomi's plea, what else had she arranged? Explain, he said, simple and heavy. The narrator watched him and couldn't tell if his voice trembled more because of anger or because the fragile thing in him, the one that had been surprised into feeling, had opened. Claire looked at him, then at the screen showing her. For a long second, she said nothing. Then the quiet came out of her like a small stream that had been dammed too long. I didn't plan to hurt you, she said. Her voice was a small, broken thing. I planned to make you act. You did this to make me act. Daniel's words were a stone dropping into the hollow of what had been trusted. Yes. Her answer was a fissure. She folded her hands, palms white at the edges. You have everything you can use to help people like Naomi. You have the reach, the speed, the money. But you always structure it. You make committees. You make programs. I have watched children get harder to save because of your committees. I watched a boy die last winter while your board debated logistics. I thought, if you saw a child on a live stream, if it reached you outside of meetings, maybe you would move. I thought you would move differently. Daniel felt the words like weather shifting. There was something righteous in Claire's confession, a tired righteousness that made a small, bitter sound in him. You used Naomi, he said, the accusation ablaze. You put a real girl in danger to manipulate me. Naomi's head bowed, hands twisting in the fabric of her jacket. She looked smaller than she had when Daniel first met her. Claire said it would be safe, Naomi whispered. She said they'd help find Ethan faster if Mr. Whitmore saw it. She said he would act. Her eyes went to Daniel, as if measuring the shape of faith. I agreed. I thought, if you could move faster than the police, if you could make them scared enough to bring him back, I thought it was a chance. The narrator watched Daniel's face contract and rearrange itself. Part of his mind cataloged the options. Claire had committed an ethical breach. The danger now was legal and reputational. Marcus's face had gone hard with calculation. Lucas's jaw tightened. But under the reactiveness of his business mind, a more private ache pressed. Naomi's fear had been real. Ethan might still be gone. The ends, whatever they were tangled with an act that had betrayed his trust. So you staged it, Daniel said, voice low. You gamed my instincts. Claire did not defend the word. I lied to you, she said. I lied because I was scared of the other kind of slow. I knew you. I guessed how your attention worked. I thought I could bend it, not break it. I wanted you to see what the numbers hide. Lucas's hand moved in a motion Daniel had seen 1,000 times when things went wrong, toward containment. This complicates operations, he said. If the video was staged, we've got legal exposure. If word gets out that our outreach team manufactured this, it will ruin any leverage we had. It invites scrutiny. Marcus's reply was softer, but not less severe. And if it is proven the plea was staged, Naomi's claim for protection weakens. The kidnappers could use it to claim extortion and reduce their liability. We've altered the facts in ways that could hurt the boy. Daniel's breath felt like a slow slide. Why did you think you could play God with a child's life? The question was not only to Claire, it was to himself. Somewhere in him, the envelope, with its quiet instruction, you decide, flickered like a mirror. He felt naked in a way he had not expected. Claire's shoulders shook. I didn't plan it carefully. I panicked. When I saw Naomi's file, the clinic notes, the missed appointments, the nights at the shelter, I felt sick. I couldn't wait for the protocol. I thought if I put her on a line that reached you without the middlemen, maybe the problem would become immediate for you. Maybe you would stop calculating and do. Daniel looked at Naomi. Her face had been worn raw by fear and the act of being performed. There was truth in her eyes, though, an ache that did not match a script. She had not been the architect. She had been the lever. You risked everything, Daniel said, the words brittle. You preyed on my side, the part that wants to be fixed quickly. You used my weakness. Claire's confession did not untangle nicely into hero or villain. It sat in a gray place that made the narrator tense. There was compassion and desperation in her motive, but also a kind of moral elbowing that had trampled a line Daniel kept between power and manipulation. The room breathed with the aftermath. Then Lucas's screen pinged, small and abrupt. He had kept one trace running while the team argued. The van that had taken Ethan had been captured on a traffic camera leaving the shelter's neighborhood, but a second camera farther down the street showed a different angle. In that clip, for one fleeting second, a passenger leaned out the van window, and the reflection in a shop window caught his face. The face was not a stranger's. It belonged to a man who had worked for one of Daniel's subsidiaries, logistics coordinator, who had recently been fired. He had been seen arguing outside the company office with a debt collector weeks earlier. The image was grainy, but the scar on the man's cheek matched the description Naomi had muttered the first night, a face she had glimpsed in the stairwell. The betrayal had two layers now. Claire had pulled a lever and broken a trust, but the van and the scar suggested an outside hand, someone exploiting chaos, someone with reason to hurt. The narrator felt the room tilt. The simpler betrayal gave way to a more dangerous map. Claire's act had altered the stage, and someone else had been waiting in the wings to take advantage. Daniel sat very still. He felt everything unspool, and not at once. Claire had hurt him. And yet, in another corner of the scene, a new treachery had shown its teeth. Opportunists, men with old grudges and fresh debts, taking a fractured moment and turning it into a crime. The stakes had grown messy in ways the neat lists could not measure. He thought of Ethan and the small, precious thing that could save him, an inhaler, a breath. He thought of the calculation and the heartache and the way people like Claire could, in their heat, become dangerous. He thought of his own readiness to move, now complicated by shame and exposure. The narrator noted the shift. Daniel had been pulled from observer to actor, and now he stood in a landscape where motives were not clean. Trust had splintered into shards, and any step forward would require him to choose which shard to pick up. The rain came back that night like a thin, steady answer to the city's quiet prayers. Daniel sat at his desk with the blinds half closed and the city's tired lights smeared into long, slow strokes. The operations room downstairs hummed with people and soft urgency, but upstairs the world contracted to the small rectangle of his screen and the heavier rectangle of his conscience. Lucas had laid out options in the blunt way of men who had learned to think in containment, mobilize a recovery team, set a trap with a stage transfer, or negotiate through a middleman known to move money without asking questions. Each option carried trade-offs. Each carried danger. Each pressed on a part of him that liked clarity but feared the cost. "We can move quickly," Lucas said over the secure line. "We can bait them with a drop and take the boy while they come. Or we can trace the man with the scar and close in. Time is the dirty variable. They have a deadline. He has asthma. We don't know their limits." Daniel heard the cold logic and felt a different sound under it. Naomi's breath when she'd said Ethan's name, the panic in her voice like a small animal trapped. Marcus's careful voice filtered in next, insisting on caution. "We mustn't precipitate harm by acting rashly. Ambushes escalate violence. If we move without legal cover and something goes wrong, you, not them, will be judged." Claire's apology had not left him. Her confession had been simple. She lied because she loved people in the way that burns. But love that manipulates became a weapon, and the weapon had drawn a response neither she nor Daniel could have fully predicted. The narrator watched him and noted how shame and resolve braided into something heavy in his chest. He wanted to fix this, and to fix his error of trust at the same time. Outside, Naomi paced on a cot in the shelter's small room, fingers worrying the hem of a blanket. Sarah kept watch like a guardian who had traded sleep for anger, eyes bright, voice steady. Naomi's face had a hardness now, an armor made of small, daily griefs. When Daniel called her to tell her the team's moves, she answered with a short, weary, "Okay," and then asked the question that landed him like hail. What if they hurt him tonight? What if the money is gone and he still can't breathe? He had no answer that satisfied the human parts of him. He could authorize a tracking sweep, a hospital check, an alert to ambulance services. He could call the police and let them run their throttle. But every map he drew ended with a question mark. The kidnapper's deadline beat like a metronome in the back of his mind. The simplest mercy, one inhaler, one dose, was a small thing with the power to mean life. A journalist cold, persistent, and hungry for the whisper of a billionaire stirred by a viral plea. Daniel declined. He had always known the cost of headlines. They reshape truth into spectacle and make victims into public property. Still, the screenshot of Grace Whitmore's deleted comment had leaked to a blog with the kind of speed that turned coincidence into conspiracy. His name and that of an activist woman were now tangled in a rumor mill that promised to spin his help into a headline about staged philanthropy. Marcus's warning about optics hardened into something real. If any of this looks like manipulation, we will lose leverage, Marcus said. If people think you were baited, donors will back away, and Naomi will be blamed for a hoax. We must control information. No leaks, no press. Control was a tempting illusion. The more Daniel tried to hold it, the more fingers slipped through. Claire wanted to go public with an explanation, to bear her method as sacrament. She wanted to confess that she had broken rules to create immediacy. Naomi did not want spectacle. She wanted her brother returned and a promise that he would be safe. Lucas wanted the boy, found with mechanical precision and minimal fuss. In the middle of their plans, a hospital in the next district reported an unclaimed child with respiratory distress who had been brought in by a man with a van. The records were terse and bureaucratic, approximate age, symptoms, first aid given, no ID. Lucas's voice tightened as he compared notes. The boy's description fit Ethan. A thread of hope ran through the room like heat. They moved immediately. Lucas sent a team to the hospital and another to the man who'd been seen in the traffic camera. Marcus demanded surveillance be squared with warrants. Daniel signed with a hand that shook only at the edges. Claire rode with the hospital team in a small car. Quite a long time, hands clenched around the armrest until the knuckles whitened. When they arrived, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and late-night exhaustion. Nurses moved like slow machines. The boy in the emergency bay was smaller than Naomi had described, and his face was asleep in the way of the medication. An inhaler lay on the tray beside him, a small plastic thing like an island in a sea of white sheets. A doctor said the words with a clinical steadiness that did not match the heat in Daniel's throat. He's stable for now. He responded to bronchodilator. We'll need a guardian's consent for anything beyond observation. Naomi had no legal guardianship on paper. The shelter could sign for temporary care, but the law demanded next of kin permissions for release to private custody. Daniel felt the familiar itch, power buffered by red tape. His money could float a hospital bill, but forms could not substitute for a mother's signature or the state's approval. He now had to decide whether to move outside legal lines to get a boy into a hand he trusted. That decision felt, again, like a moral ledger with columns that refused to line up. Outside the hospital, someone had been watching. A camera had captured a brief exchange between man with a scar and a second figure. A person Daniel did not know, someone leaning into the van with a practiced ease. The footage suggested coordination, not a solitary act of desperation. The plot, which had already been knotted by Claire's staging, now showed another strand. Professionals with a method exploiting mess. Lucas wanted to snatch the van and the men. Marcus counseled caution, lest a botched raid cost a child his breath. Naomi wanted her brother safe and fast, and did not care whose legal boundaries were bent. Claire wanted to apologize publicly and to throw herself against the machinery that had made her tactic necessary. Daniel stood between them, feeling the weight of choices. To abide by process was to risk the boy's life. To break, it was to risk his own liberty and possibly the future of the very programs designed to help. The narrator watched him move like a man walking a narrow beam over dark water, balancing calculus and compassion with one hand while the other searched for purchase. He thought of his father's voice, always the sharp edge. He thought of the envelope on his counter, the anonymous demand for decision. He thought of Ethan and the inhaler that the boy needed, like oxygen and mercy. He thought of Claire's tear-streaked face and how easily good intentions could bruise. When the call came at 3 in the morning, Lucas's voice thin with both fatigue and something like triumph, the plan was set. They would follow the hospital lead. They would set a controlled transfer with paramedics at the ready and legal counsel present. Daniel authorized it, but the moment he did, he felt something settle that was not relief. It was the heavy knowledge that whatever success they might achieve would be built on a mound of compromised choices. As dawn spilled gray over the city, Ethan's small chest rose and fell under monitoring, and Daniel waited in a hallway smelling of lemon cleaner, shoes whispering on tile. The stakes felt raw and exposed. Every second felt like a choice, each one asking him what he would trade to make the world right. The shipping yard smelled of wet metal and old gasoline, the rain turning the chain-link fences into veins of silver under the sodium lights. Daniel's breath clouded in the night. Each step toward the parked ambulance sounded too loud, like someone counting seconds on a heart monitor. Claire walked beside him, small and fierce, her apology folded into the set of her jaw. Lucas fanned the perimeter with men who moved like shadows, radios whispering. Marcus stayed back, facing the color of careful worry. Naomi clutched Daniel's coat sleeve as if it were the only steady thing in the world. Ethan slept in the ambulance under a thin blanket, his small chest rising and falling with a medicated calm. The inhaler sat on a tray like a tiny lamp. For a moment, everyone simply watched him. No plans, no strategy, just the soft, human rhythm of a child breathing. The city felt very far away. Then a van's headlights carved through the rain. It eased into the yard like a predator returning to its lair. 2 men stepped out, their boots sinking into puddles. One was the man with the scar. The other was someone new. Taller, wearing a hood, movement slow and bored. The men's mouths were set like people taking part in a rehearsal they had done too many times. "Hands where we can see them," Lucas called, voice hard as the night. The men froze like actors waiting for a cue. Daniel stepped forward. His jacket was damp, his hair stuck to his forehead. He looked at the scarred man, and then at the hooded figure. "We don't want blood," he said, and his voice was the kind that had once closed deals and now closed distances. The scarred man spat on the ground. "You think you're the one who writes the checks," he said. "You think rich men don't bleed?" The hooded figure laughed, a small, bitter sound. "We weren't going to hurt the boy," he said. "We were going to make him breathing again, worth something." Daniel's mouth tightened. "Who hired you?" he asked. The scarred man's eyes flickered toward the hooded figure. The hooded man leaned back, pulled down his hood, and for a heartbeat the yard seemed to breathe in as one. The face under the hood was familiar in a way that landed like a punch. Grace Whitmore, hair plastered to her face by wet, stood there, not as an activist in the distance, but as someone who had walked into the center of his life and stayed. Her clothes were soaked. Her expression was fierce and raw. Daniel's memory closed around an old photograph, 2 kids on a park bench, one laughing, one looking away. He had never named the boy beside him then. Now the world made that blank a wound. Grace's eyes burned with a kind of terrible clarity. "You left us," she said. The sentence was small and enormous at once. "You staged this." Daniel said, "The question is more of a hope than an accusation. You use a child?" Grace's face did not soften. There was no plea for mercy in it. "I didn't want him harmed," she said. "I wanted you to see what it looks like when your decisions have weight. I wanted you to feel the time it takes a breath to run out. I wanted," she choked on the words, "for you to stop being the man who sits above and decides." Claire moved like someone trying to shelter a bird. "Grace," she said, voice low, "you put a boy at risk. You can say you wanted truth, but this—" Grace looked at Claire with a kind of pity. "You lied," she said simply. "You made him act. I only made him look." Daniel felt something cold and deep under his ribs. Betrayal had come from many directions. Claire's staged plea, hired men, a family truth exposed like a raw vein. Each one cut in its own way. He looked at Ethan sleeping and the risk he had run. How the smallest misstep could have been fatal. The scarred man spat again. "Payment," he said. "We want what we were promised." Grace's jaw trembled. "I didn't hire them to harm him," she said. "I hired them to take him to make you choose. I thought you'd give something that would change things. I thought you'd be shocked into action." Lucas stepped forward then, the man who had spent his life refusing to believe in shades of gray. "This ends now," he said. "Drop your weapons." The scarred man smiled like a man who had been handed a reprieve. "We did what we needed," he said. "We did what debtors and hunger make honest men do." Daniel didn't look at the men. He looked at Grace as if he were trying to find a hinge to open what she had meant. "Why me?" he asked. "Why use a child?" "Because you are the center of the story," Grace said. "Because you never had to sit in a shelter and wonder if the next breath would come. Because you made decisions that left people like my mother, like Naomi's mother, with nothing. You think the ledger clears your sins. I wanted you to know what a missing inhaler feels like. A long silence stretched, full of rain and the hum of distant traffic. The narrating voice, cool and observing, noted the irony. Daniel, a man whose life had been about rulings and balance, now stood stripped of his usual tools. The only instruments that mattered were lungs and mercy. "Give me 1 hour," Daniel said suddenly. His voice was oddly calm. "1 hour. I will give you what you demand, but no more blood." He raised his hands to show he meant it. "You take the money, we end this. No violence. I will not let Ethan be harmed." Grace's laugh was a thin thing. "You always make it about money," she said. "Even now." Daniel felt heat rise, not from anger, but from a clarity that had been forced upon him. "Money doesn't bring him back," he said, "but it buys time. I can move faster than forgiveness. Do you want him safe? Then let us do that first." Claire watched him with a look that asked him what he was willing to become. Marcus's hand pressed into his arm, and for a beat, they weighed the legal cost again. Daniel's decision had always been to measure damage and cover it. Now the damage was a boy's breath. The cost was his own pride. The exchange was messy, petty in its details. An envelope passed under an ambulance door, a shifted backpack, a whisper of names. The scarred man counted notes with the care of someone who had thought this moment homage, not collapse. Grace stood a step back, and somewhere in her stance was regret and resolve braided together. When the van pulled away, Ethan did not come with it. For a second, a cold panic flared like old thunder. Then a small figure appeared from the shadows, Naomi running, face streaked with rain, slamming into the ambulance door. She hurled herself inside, and Ethan's eyes opened, small and bewildered by lights. He clutched at Naomi's sleeve, sucking air with the greedy hunger of a child who had been kept from the thing he needed. They were safe. The word landed like a physical thing. Men around Daniel exhaled. The yard seemed to surrender a held breath. But the victory tasted of ash. Grace did not run. She let the police, who had watched from a distance, move in. The scarred man tried to flee, and a noise like a single gunshot stopped him. Lucas's team had made certain they could prevent blood without spilling it. The scarred man was handcuffed. The hooded accomplice tried to shout and was seized. Grace put her hands behind her back when commanded, and for a moment Daniel saw her as both sister and saboteur. Later, in the quiet of an interrogation room with rain still drawing maps on the window, Grace faced Daniel. Her wet hair clung to her forehead. She looked exhausted, like someone who had just given everything and found the result mixed. "I wanted you to hurt the way we hurt," she said. Her voice was small. "I wanted you to stop pretending a charity fund could fix what your factories did. I wanted the world to know you had a cost." Daniel thought of the envelope on his kitchen counter, the anonymous line to decide. He thought of his father telling him to be the sharp edge. He thought of Ethan's small hands. "You could have done something else," he said, not as an accusation, but a lesson he had finally learned. "You could have asked. You could have shown me the ledger instead of breaking a life." Grace's face softened, not with surrender, but with truth. I knew you'd ignore a ledger, she said. You needed to feel the missing breath. The narrator noticed the new shape in Daniel then, the man who had always measured risk in spreadsheets, now weighing cost in human algebra. He had saved a boy and lost something quieter, his old illusion that power could stay neat. He had a confession to make, not to the police, but to himself. He walked to Naomi and Ethan, and he sat with them in the ambulance while paramedics checked vitals and Sarah held a hand. He let the boy curl into him, small and trusting, and felt something unhook inside. An admission that rescue could not be an audit. He called a press conference the next morning, not to boast, but to admit that the systems he had built had holes. He pledged funds and care that could not be cries for praise, but real, long repairs. He named the errors and let the world see him raw. Grace was charged, the law doing what law must. Claire stayed by Naomi, and though their methods had been wrong, they would now face consequences too. The scarred man would answer for violence. The city would talk, and the headlines would be hungry. But inside the ambulance, Daniel watched Ethan sleep and felt a new ledger line form. One without columns. It was a line of responsibility, messy and ongoing. Outside, the rain finally eased, leaving the world shining and unmade. The narrator softened, the impartial voice merging with the human one. A man had been pulled from the safety of decisions made at a distance into the hard, itchy truth of being present. He had been betrayed, yes, by many, by desperation and by his own distance, but he had also been given a choice. He had chosen, in a way he could not have predicted, to answer not from power, but from the small, urgent mercy of keeping a child breathing. The city woke to a clear sky that felt like a new permission. Daniel sat in a small room at the hospital while Ethan slept, breathing easily, the blue stripe on the inhaler glinting like a promise. The boy's chest rose and fell with the small, unremarkable rhythm of life, and that ordinary music made Daniel ache in a way money had never touched. He thought of the long lists he kept, budgets, boards, projections, and how useless they felt against the tiny exact need of a child's breath. Naomi sat close, exhausted and trembling, but steady enough now to smile when Ethan stirred. She held his hand like someone who had crawled through fire to find something warm. Claire hovered near them, her usual calm gone thin and raw. Marcus read through legal notes, tired beyond the comfort of counsel. Lucas watched the corridor for any sign of trouble, the soldier who would never forget the yard that night. Grace was in a holding room down the hall, arrested and stared at in a way that made her look at once brave and small. Daniel kept thinking about the choices. The first choice had been simple, reach out because a girl asked. The second had been twisted, Claire's staging, Grace's plan, the scarred man's greed. And the third had been the wrenching series of decisions in the yard where he traded money for a breathing room. Each decision left its mark. When Ethan opened his eyes and offered a small, sleepy smile, the world resumed shape around a difficult center. Naomi kissed his forehead, and the motion was both the end of a particular terror and the beginning of another long, slow work. Children recovered. Systems did not always. People who had acted with love sometimes acted wrongly. People with power sometimes did not know the cost of an action. Daniel asked for a moment alone with Naomi. He found himself fumbling for the right words in a way that bothered him because he had rarely been at the mercy of sentences. Naomi, he said, then stopped. She looked up, eyes bright, with a kind of brave distrust. You saved him, she said bluntly. It was both a statement and a question. I helped when I could, Daniel replied, but I need to say something honest. Your life was used. Claire lied. And I should have been more present earlier. He found himself naming things he had kept quiet for years. I have been distant. I thought numbers were the same as care. I'm sorry. Naomi watched him like someone listening to the weather. Sorry is a small word, she said, but you came. He's here. That matters. They made plans that day that were practical and real. Daniel signed hospital forms, insisted on paying bills, and arranged for immediate follow-up care for Ethan. He also asked Naomi what would help her family beyond money. She told him things that did not fit in spreadsheets, Steady work for her mother, a reliable clinic close to home, legal help to ensure their apartment was safe. Daniel listened and wrote notes without the neat habit of turning every need into a project first. He let Naomi speak, and in listening, he felt a new kind of ledger forming, a list of people, not accounts. Behind the scenes, consequences followed. Grace faced charges for kidnapping and conspiracy. Claire faced internal reviews and possible criminal exposure for staging the plea. The scarred man and his accomplices were arrested and would be prosecuted for the violence and the holding. The law did its blunt work, separating acts into culpability, but it could not fully translate the human motives behind each act into a simple verdict. Daniel chose to use his power differently. He spoke to Marcus and Lucas and said he would not hide behind silence to protect reputation. He would face the headlines, answer hard questions, and take legal responsibility where it applied. He also pledged funding not for a one-off spectacle, but for the slow, steady things Naomi had named: a community clinic with free inhalers, a small crisis fund run by people from the neighborhoods it served, and a legal aid program to help families threatened by debt and predatory schemes. He insisted that Claire be part of a process of restoration. Not to erase wrongdoing, but to place consequences alongside a requirement to work in the community she had harmed, should the courts allow. The press made their narratives. Some called Grace a zealot, others called Claire a reckless savior. Daniel became a headline in the way he had always dreaded. He took calls and sat through interviews, and he felt naked under lights in a way that mattered. The apology he offered publicly was not elegant, but it was honest. He admitted to distance and to the system's failures and promised to invest in the slow work of change. Grace's sentencing was complicated. The law punished the act of taking a child, and she accepted responsibility. In a small corner of the courtroom, Daniel asked his lawyer to speak during sentencing in mitigation, not because he wanted to save a headline, but because he believed punishment without repair would leave wounds open. He offered to support restorative programs that could be part of Grace's path forward. The judge listened and balanced law with plea, and in the end, the sentence included time, but also mandated community service and counseling. Some called it mercy, others called it leniency. Naomi called it complicated and truthful. Months later, the clinic opened in a narrow storefront, bright and honest. The sign read Whitmore Community Health. It felt awkward at first, a billionaire's name above a free clinic. People whispered about optics. Daniel knew they had a right to whisper. He met Naomi's mother at the ribbon cutting. She did not look at the cameras but at Daniel, and in her face there was a small, private grace. Claire worked there, mornings filling prescriptions and afternoons running outreach, her hands steady and humbled. She had faced reprimand and stay of work elsewhere, and she carried the weight of what she'd done. But she also carried the task of rebuilding trust with the people she had used. Grace visited the clinic once, escorted by a counselor during a court-mandated program. She stood in the doorway, like someone watching a storm clear. She and Daniel exchanged a look that contained no forgiveness, but a complicated understanding. They did not speak much. What they shared was quieter, an acknowledgement that pain had driven action, and action had consequences. That was enough for the moment. Daniel learned to sit in rooms longer than he had before. He attended community meetings, listened while people talked about roofs and rent and medicine. He learned that solving things required more than money. It required presence, time, and willingness to be corrected. He also learned that sometimes people who wanted change would choose wrong roads, and that justice had to account for both harm and motive. At home, the envelope that had started the movement sat on his desk. He did not open it again. The words "you decide" had become less a command and more a mirror. He found himself waking earlier now, not to call about markets, but to reports from the clinic. He could no longer measure impact only in KPIs. He measured it in kids who came back for checkups, in parents who trusted a doctor, in a small boy named Ethan who had learned to keep an inhaler in his school bag. On a quiet evening months later, Daniel sat by a window and watched the last light fall. The city below still held its old injustices and its small mercies. He felt the old ache of wanting neat outcomes, but it had softened. He had been betrayed by people he trusted and by strangers. He had also been given a chance to answer differently. The narrator, both intimate and distant, closed on him with a gentle attention. A man who had built his life on decisions made far from need had been made to come close. He had been pushed by fear, by shame, and by a child's breath into an imperfect but honest change. The moral remained messy. The world did not tidy itself by confessions or by clinics, but it had shifted. Daniel understood now that to hold power was also to hold responsibility that does not come with neat accounting. He would spend the rest of his life learning how to keep that balance. So, tell me, if you were in his shoes, mocked and underestimated, would you have revealed your success or walked away in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that flip the script on arrogance.